So as human beings, we are naturally curious. We are naturally curious to learn about things that will improve our quality of life, improve the way we see the world. But the problem is, the school system that we've all been through has stomped out any love that we have for learning, any curiosity that we have inside us. Because it takes learning from this thing that we naturally all want to do. You know, as kids, we're all like naturally curious. Like I remember when I was a kid, I was that kid who was like always asking like 1,000 questions, like, oh, why are frogs green? Why is the sky blue? Etc. etc. But what the school system does is it takes this curiosity, this natural curiosity that we have for learning. First of all, it forces us to learn one specific like topic. Like we may not be interested in maths, for example, but it forces us to learn maths. And not only does it force us to learn things that we're not interested in, but it makes it so that we have to do well to get a good grade. Essentially, learning becomes not something to improve our life, but something to get a good grade and pass so we can achieve in life. So most guys, when they leave the education system, most people, they stop learning. They're like, oh, thank God school's over. I never have to learn again. Like, it's so sad because like the curiosity inside of us just gets stomped out by the school system. And because of that, you might be like slightly traumatized when you read. Like you might be reading with the completely wrong mindset, the completely wrong approach. Reading might be a bit painful for you. So in this video, I'm going to share with you, a couple tips to change how you view reading, change your approach and methods to reading. And I guarantee you apply these tips that I learned in this video, you will instantly be reading like a ton more, just automatically. And you will actually enjoy a lot more. Okay, so the first tip that I can give you. So I was talking to my friend the other day and we had like some downtime, like an hour where we were waiting for something to happen. And I was like, hey, do you want to read now? We can like spend the next hour reading. And so I pulled out my Kindle to read. And he was like, oh no, man, I don't feel like reading the book I'm reading right now. Maybe I'll just take a break. So what I realized is that most guys, at any one time, they'll have like one book they're reading. Like, for example, they'll buy The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, and that's the book they're reading. Whenever they're going to go read, they'll be reading The Power of Now, and they'll read it until they're done with the book. But the problem with that is a lot of time when you want to read, you don't want to read that book. Like you'll be like, okay, I've got some time to read right now, but I don't feel like reading The Power of Now, therefore I'm not going to read. It's because you're stuck in this mindset of like, you have to finish this book, or otherwise you can't read anything else. So the first tip I can give you is let yourself be free. Don't get attached to any one book. Me personally, I read like 10 to 15 books at any time. I have a Kindle here, and I just have like 15 books that I just swap between. Like when I've got time to read, I'll think like, okay, what am I curious of learning right now? Like I might sit down to read and I might be like, okay, I don't feel like reading this sleep book right now. I'm going to read about influence or something like that. So it's much better to follow your own natural curiosities because you're probably curious about a bunch of different topics, right? But at any one time, you might not be curious on that topic. At any one time, there might be one topic on your mind that you're really curious and really interested in learning about. So it's better to let yourself be free and have more than one book that you're reading and just follow your curiosity in the moment. And that brings me on to step 2, which is kind of related. Stop reading a book from like beginning to end. So how do most people read a book? They'll take the book, they'll go to page 1, and they'll just read from beginning to end. Now that's fine, you can do that. And chances are the earlier chapters build up on the later chapters. But this is a much better approach to reading. Let me know what you think. So I learned this from the YouTuber Ali Abdal. Basically, you want to read a book like how you read an article. I just got to plug in my laptop. So you want to read a book like you read an article. So how do you read an article? You open up the article and you probably skim through it, right? And you look for like an interesting section. And then you start with the interesting sections. Then you might go to the beginning and the end. You kind of follow your own curiosities, right? That's exactly how you should approach a book. So when I get a book, I will go straight to the page of contents. And I will look at the page of contents and I'll go, okay, which part looks interesting? Oh, part 3, how to win people to your way of thinking. I'll start with that. So just kind of like within a book, just follow your natural curiosities, read the chapters that interest you. And if you're reading a chapter and you find it's not giving you much value, don't be afraid to abandon it. Like the first chapter of most books is the preface, right? Honestly, I just skip that a lot of the time because it's just like background information. So yeah, don't be afraid to not only jump around the book, but don't be afraid to abandon chapters, or also don't be afraid to abandon a book altogether. If the book's not giving you value, forget it. Abandon the book. And that brings me on to to tip three. Many guys are afraid to abandon a book. They're like, oh, I've started this book, I've got to finish it. They have this mindset of like, I got to finish this book. And one of the big reasons is people are really attached to how many books they read every year. Like whenever I talk to someone, a lot of the time when I tell them like, oh yeah, I like to read, the question they'll always ask me is they'll ask me, how many books do you read a year? It's like people are attached with the number of books they read, and that's like attached to their identity. But the problem is, if you're so obsessed with reading a certain number of books, then if a book starts losing value to you, like let's say for example in a book, the last few chapters, you're not getting much value from them, right? But you're like, oh damn, I'm so close to the end, I've got to finish it so I can say I've read this book. So now you're just reading the book for your ego, for the numbers, rather than to actually learn. Because why do we read? We read to learn. We read because we're curious and we want to improve our quality of life. So stop getting attached with the number of books you read. Don't be afraid to abandon a book. Don't be afraid to jump around. And another big one, don't be afraid to reread books. Like you might want to reread a book, but you might be like, oh, it'll be a waste because I can't say I've read a new book, you know? But often rereading a book gives you like 100 times more value the second time around. Like this book, The War of Art, that I'm rereading right now, I've reread it like 4 times. And every time I reread it, I get like a bunch of new ideas, a bunch of new insights. So don't be afraid to reread books just because you're obsessed with the number of books you read. Like people will post on like Goodreads, like, oh, my goal is to read 50 books this year, 20 books this year. You know, it's kind of lame when people ask me how many books do I read, and I have to tell them, oh, I read 3/4 of 10 books and 1/4 of 3 books. You know, like I can't say like a nice clean number, like, oh, I read 50 books this year. But who cares? We're not reading for some dick measuring contest. We're reading to gain knowledge, to improve our quality of life. So yes, kind of similar related to that, tip 4, you want to follow your curiosities. Like you want to read with the mindset of a hunter. You want to read like you're hunting for ideas. Often I'll find when I'm reading, I naturally start to read a bit faster, or I naturally just want to get to the end of the chapter or the end of the book. Because I want to be like, yes, I read a chapter today. Or yes, I read 10 pages today. Don't get obsessed with that idea of reaching some goal of 10 pages or reading an entire chapter. That takes you out of the present moment and it makes reading a means to an end. You want to read like you're a hunter. You want to be fully engaged with whatever sentence you're reading because you're hunting for ideas. You're hunting for that light bulb moment where you're like, oh my God, that's such a good insight. That's such a good idea that I learned. I can apply this to my life like this. So when you read, it's better to read one page. It's better to spend an hour reading one page and get a life-changing insight from it than it is to read an entire chapter and get nothing out of it. So really slow down when you read and be there in the moment. Try to understand every paragraph. Like if your mind goes mindless and you want to reread a paragraph, do it. You know, don't be obsessed with page number or chapter number. Be in the moment and read slower. Okay, now a bonus tip here. This one like is probably one of the biggest ones that made me read so much more. This tip that I'm about to give you. Your reading will improve so much, the amount you read, if you simply get a Kindle. Now here's why. Many guys are obsessed with like physical books. They're like, oh man, I love the feeling of a physical book. It feels so nice. I love the smell of paper. It feels great. Okay, yeah, it does. It feels great. But why do we read? Do we read because we love the smell of the book? Do we read because we love the feeling of the paper? If you love the smell and the feeling of stuff, then go out in nature, go touch grass or something. We read for knowledge. We read to improve our life. And on that, when we read, we're not thinking about how the book feels. We're not thinking about how it smells. We're just fully absorbed in the content. So who cares how the book feels or smells? It's like, there's information about this online. They've proven that if you read with a Kindle, you will just naturally read more because it's so much easier. You literally just press a button and you can just read like a paragraph really easily whenever you want. You can carry the Kindle around with you super easily. It's basically like 20 books in this tiny device. So you can carry so many books, so many more books with you. You can fill in tiny moments of your day with reading much more easily. Books are much cheaper. Like, if you think it's expensive, get a Kindle secondhand. I got this for like 50 Australian dollars, so pretty cheap, and I've gotten like so much value out of it. And honestly, it looks like a book. It really does. Like the pages look like paper, and it's so much easier to hold. Like a book, I can't go back to a regular book now. I really can't. Like I've got this book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, and I just bought it again on Kindle because I hated reading a physical book. Like if you've never tried a Kindle, like the guys who hate Kindles, they've never tried it. Once you try a Kindle, you can never go back. So I hope these tips help, bro. Like, let me know in the comments what books you've read, what books you've liked to read, and why you like them. Because I'm always looking for recommendations. Anyway, see you later.